Hey you, thanks for tuning in. I am Hannah, Qualitative Researcher, and this is Survey Teardown 5 of the 50 Surveys Project. We'll be tearing down 50 surveys in 50 days, 50 marketing surveys, with the goal of asking better, smarter, more effective questions so that we can get better, smarter, more effective data and insight. Cool? Today's is kind of a takeoff or I don't know the right word. I can't think of it. It is the follow-up, we'll say that, to yesterday's survey 4. In that we tore down, not really a survey, we tore down the email that led up to this survey. So check that out if you need help writing an email with a survey. And here we're going to talk about the post-launch survey. And really, it has all of these goals. And these benefits are not necessarily unique to a launch. You want a survey that works. You want a survey that doesn't feel like work, that isn't long for you to write, isn't burdensome for people to answer. It gets you the insight that you need, that you can act on, that is meaningful, that tells you something that you can actually use to improve the next product iteration or launch. I went kind of crazy with some formatting here just to make things stand out and because my brain felt creative. All right, so let's dive in. This is the survey. It is 5 questions long, and really the last 2. I guess it's technically 6. But these last 2 aren't questions per se. But this went out, if you haven't seen the previous episode, the survey 4, this went out after a launch. So this individual is a freelance copywriter. She launched a training called Emails for Launching, and then she sent a survey out to folks who did not buy to find out why, and to use those insights to improve her next launch and kind of just generally to improve her business, etc. So these are the questions that she asked, and I want to dive into, as we've been doing, to each of the questions. So I've broken it up so it's a little bit bigger. We'll look at the pros, we'll look at the cons, and we'll end with some recommendations of what I would do. How would I approach a post-launch survey, given what we know about this particular survey and the kind of information it seems like she wants to get? How can we optimize that? All right, so let's look at the pros. First question, what is the single biggest reason you decided not to sign up for emails for launching? So great thing here is that she's asking a why question, right? The why question is like, why didn't you sign up? But she's asking it as a what question. This is something that is really interesting and comes from the world of psychology and psychotherapy and counseling as well, where when you ask people why, it often puts them on the defensive, right? Like, why'd you do that? Or why didn't you do that? Even if your tone is fairly neutral, it's difficult to ask why in a way that actually sounds neutral, especially in text, especially in written form. So an easier way to ask why is to ask what or how come. In this case, that's exactly what she did. What's the single biggest reason you decided not to sign up? So it sort of inquires, as opposed to why can tend to make people feel on the defensive and sort of like put them on the spot. People might feel like that's the tone that my mom used to use. Like, why didn't you clean your room? It can be very kind of attacking and condescending and kind of very forward. And so we actually want to inquire. We don't want to make people feel like there's a right or a wrong answer here and they have to defend it, or that they've done something wrong by not deciding to buy your product. So asking a what question instead of a why. This isn't like a hard and fast rule. I would say whenever you can, ask a what or a how instead of a why. But I often ask why to be more direct when I've built rapport, especially in an interview. You can use it as a really nice, neat follow-up. And it gets to the heart of the question when you've already established some trust and some warmth and your tone is really, really clear. So in writing, I would steer clear of that. next question, would you consider signing up for emails for launching in the future? So this is an important question, a good intention here. I don't agree with the phrasing of the question and the design of the question, but the intent to figure out, is this something that might be of interest, and like who exactly was on the fence is going to be really useful for you. It's a good thermometer check. And potentially maybe you populate them on a list to get specific notice and kind of nudge them and sort of reference back like, hey, that they sort of have indicated that they want to grab this in the future. And last question, at least on this slide, what would need to happen to make joining emails for launching an absolute no-brainer for you? So this is great in that we're asking for specifics, right? Like not just would you consider joining, but what would it take? What was missing? Again would recommend a slightly different structure to the question and actually a different approach altogether here. But the intent of asking for specifics, like what about the training? Let's get real granular. It's going to be really helpful for the person writing the survey. So that's great. If what I teach, cover in emails for launching isn't what you need, what else are you struggling with, or where are you stuck in your business? So this is a good general question, and it's great to always ask a catch-all, something that's not related to the thing that you're talking about, which in this case is her training. A catch-all is always good because it gives people room to say more than you might have asked. And perhaps your questions have made them think about something else, and this way they don't have to go back and refresh or revise an answer. They can just keep going and sort of dump everything else here. So that's great. Name, that's fine. And then email. Great that she's mentioning and calling out the incentive and sort of referring to it, especially if that was the case that folks wanted to or were willing to do the survey in the first place for the incentive. All right, so let's look at what could use some work here and areas that could use a little love and improvement. All right, so this first question, there's a lot of text here, right? Even though this is a description, it's very difficult to tell that this is the question and this is the description. It just seems like a giant wall of text, very overwhelming. And then the job here is in order to figure out how to even answer this question, this part's blank, so it's an open text, free form. So I have to kind of read all of this. And that feels like work. When you have an idea of what the reasons are for why someone might not buy, and often there are product-specific reasons, but there are also a lot of general reasons. It was too expensive. I didn't think it was relevant for me. Not the right time. There's a lot that you can do here to sort of eliminate the work. People will respond lazily if given the option. I mean, and that's not an attack. It's just sort of the reality of how we tend to engage when the incentive to engage isn't clear, when it's not easy to. So a multiple choice would feel less like work and also put the onus on you to do the work. And you can always have an other option to capture if, one of those options doesn't fit, they can still respond in their unique way. But this just as is feels like a lot of work, a lot of text. This question here, would you consider signing up for emails for launching in the future? It's too soon. The intent and the description in the email was like, hey, I want some feedback. I'd love to know why you didn't join. And immediately it's like, so will you join in the future? We haven't even really dug deep into what was happening. Like, were you on the fence? Were you hoping for something else? So this feels really, really early. It's also like a hypothetical, right? So we're now asking them to predict in the future. I don't know if I want to say no. Should I say yes? People are horrible at predicting in the future, and that goes for everyone. And it's also like, what does this tell you, right? If they say yes, okay, maybe you decide to put them in some kind of list. But when you request the email in the later questions, it's optional. But you're not really getting anything concrete here. So I think there's absolutely a better way to get your point across, that you want to know, like, how interested were they, right? This is like that check, sort of a pulse check. I think that's important, and I think there's a different way to do it. So I'd rephrase and totally ask it later. What would you need to make joining an absolute no-brainer for you? So first off, that isn't mentioned here, it's a little clunky, the wording. You don't want people to have to read like every single word, or else they would miss the question. I do think we need to go for a conversational tone of like an absolute no-brainer, but absolute no-brainer is very clunky and like chunky to read through, and my brain has to like stop and pause and go through it slowly. So you want to make surveys really like simple, like very kind of idiot proof, like you don't, or skim proof even. You don't have to spend a lot of energy to figure out what is being said and what to say. Again, like what would need to happen. This is also a hypothetical. You're asking them to do the work. The question itself is also a bit awkward, like in terms of phrasing. One, I don't know how different the answer will be for you to get like insight from here versus here. I mean, I see that the description's different, like looking at format and structure, she's talking about like changing potentially what aspects about the program, but that's not clear unless I get to the description. And then what would need to happen to make joining an absolute no-brainer? Like, what does that mean? What would need to happen? So now I need to think about what did happen, and then I need to think about why I didn't join, and then I need to think about what would have made me join. Like, it's a lot of work. This is not a really intuitive question. We do not want to make people work in the survey. We want them to report their actual experience, and then we do the work of figuring out what that means. And often that means having them unpack their pain. So forget asking them about solutions. Forget asking them about how to improve your product. Ask them about what they're struggling with in their decision to buy, what they're struggling with in your product, and then you figure out what format that can look like. But as is, this is very heavy, a very laden question. If we are interested in the aspect, like the format of the training, we need to make a question that speaks to that specifically. So it's very, very easy and obvious in terms of how to answer this. All right, let's look at these last questions here. So if what I teach isn't what you need, what else are you struggling with in your business? So this is very, very vague, right? Like, we're talking about emails for launching. Now there's a huge question of like, well, there's so many parts of a business. What falls under the category of like relevant here? What should I put? Should this just be like a brain dump? Do I mention something else? Like, there's no parameters given here. And so it's difficult for me to even hone what to put down. And then I think like, should I say that here? I mean, there's just a lot of friction with the question. How else might I be able to support you? What other programs would you like to see me create for you? So this again feels like I have to do the work of coming up with the solution. Whereas instead, if you ask me what I'm struggling with as it relates to emails or launch emails in particular, then we can have a different conversation. If you're a copywriter and it's not specific to just launch emails and you want to talk about a copy in general, well, that's a helpful parameter and constraint versus a question that is as general as this. So where you can be specific in your ask and you actually get specific insight. The ask for a name here, it just feels a little random. Like maybe you start with it, but why? Well, rationale will help people give you something. But if you don't really explain it, and since you're asking like second to last, it just feels a little arbitrary. And one of the value add points, one of the benefits might be with a survey like this that, hey, we'll keep it anonymous. You can always end a survey too of like, if you're okay with being connected to chat more, like we'd love to better understand your thinking process and decision and see if we can better help you, and then they enter their email. But otherwise it can feel a little like arbitrary. So even though this seems small and harmless, you really want to be clear with your space and very deliberate with your space here, right? So if you don't have an actual use for it, I wouldn't include it at all and use it as a benefit of keeping the insights anonymous. The email here, so the by the way message is like, hey, here's that incentive we talked about that she mentioned in the email, that if you fill out the survey, you will get this free part of the training. But the premise here is email. So I would actually lead with this. This has a kind of like maybe a playful, a little sort of reprimandy tone. I don't know if reprimand's the right word, but there's a bit of tone here. Like, if you need this, if you want this, I'm gonna need it. I would lead with like, if you want to get your incentive, pop in your email. Or even making it more accessible, more instantaneous, so that when they hit submit, you'll get the download link for this on the next page. Feels like I'm just going to hand deliver it to you. You don't actually have to enter your email at all. But I would lead with the incentive, mention of the incentive over and above asking for the email. And in that case, I would then not include it as like a question and just have it as like text, closing text to the email. All right, so let's wrap this up with some recommendations. I kind of redid the survey here, and I'll talk through what it is, and so you can sort of see the differences in what I'm thinking. One, at a glance, like this is, so we've got 4 questions, and to end here, I haven't included like what would normally you would include a survey description, and you would include some kind of close that speaks to the incentive. We don't want to confuse the incentive with the actual questions. So I would call out the incentive at the top in the description as well as in the close, but then keep the questions separate. So the first question, you can see the first 3 are all multiple choice. So instantly there's like a bit of, oh, okay, this seems really easy. This is a long question, but I don't have to actually read it. I'm just sort of skimming the answers here. The tone is very conversational. So it looked like you were interested in emails for launching. What stopped you from signing up? Really zero tone there, very direct, very to the point, non-accusatory, and you have options here. So I'm kind of facilitating your thinking, right? Bad timing, wasn't sure it was relevant for me, too expensive. I wasn't convinced it would help with my launch. I want you to do the emails for me. Adding in some product specific reasons, so reasons tied to the actual launch of emails for launching. But what this does is like, I don't have to think out loud. I can actually do a process of elimination. Like, oh, it wasn't any of these. It was X. So you want to help jog people's memories. And that's what a lot of times multiple choice can do. And next question here. So this is sort of continuing. I say, got it. So what are some of the biggest things you struggle with when writing emails for a launch? Check all that apply. The got it here is like kind of continuing from the previous question. It makes the whole tone feel like we're interacting. I ask you a question, you click a response, and then I receive your response and go into the next question. What I've also done here is collapse. So initially, what she was asking was like, what's the reason you decided not to sign up? And what about the program would make you want to join? And what I've done is just said like, well, what is it that you're really struggling with still now, right? So we're assuming that you're still interested in the concept of emails for launching, but what are you struggling with? And I've just included a few here. There are plenty more. This is not my area of expertise, so I just put a few that I've bumped into, I know others have bumped into, of like, how long should I be emailing for? How often? How many emails? Is my list even big enough? All of the like launching woes. When do I upsell? Should I downsell non-buyers, etc.? But you would populate this with common concerns or areas that people struggle with. And this also demonstrates that you know the space, right? Like you understand. A lot of times you even articulating the problem so well makes people feel like, oh, you must have a solution because you really, really get the problem. And this is a really great opportunity to do that. So don't feel like the surveys are just kind of passive. You're just collecting data. You're also giving people a voice. And the better that you can speak for them through your multiple choice options, the more understood they're going to feel, the more they'll resonate with your message in general. And this just really helps with kind of brand trust as well. Next question here. Are you interested in hearing about the next time I open up emails for launching? So the way that she asked it was, would you consider signing up for it in the future? Well, because that's a hypothetical, it's a future focused question, we actually want to ask about a present tense. Are you interested right now in hearing about the next time I open up this program? So I'm asking about the future right now. Like right now, do you feel interested in this? Stops them from having to play psychic and lets you get concrete insight. So now you can actively put them on a list, because they haven't talked about would they sign up or not, which is difficult to say when they had just rejected buying, right? Like we're asking them this question, but they just said no after we just launched it. So the likelihood of them answering in the positive is very slim. We've really made it a narrow window. Whereas here we're saying, are you interested in hearing about the next time I open up? So we're getting people on the fence here, and really kind of, we're going to be able to target them with even more, I hate the word target because it's like fire, aim, but we're going to be able to offer them more relevant messaging to help them make the right decision for them. And last question here, anything you want to tell me that I didn't ask about and probably should have? So it's a little bit of a playful question, and a catch-all again, very personable, very like, hey, I didn't ask everything. Maybe I missed something that was important to you. So very, very human and accessible that way. But then, of course, you would have an actual close, not questions, but actual end to the survey that speaks about the incentive, and that when they submit this, they'll get an incentive on the spreadsheet or whatever that link is on the next screen. And then you would, of course, have your title and description as well. So that's it. That is how to write a post-launch survey. Hopefully you can leverage some of these insights for post anything. The same ideas and principles absolutely hold. But I hope you find this helpful. If you have any questions, pop them in the comments below. I will absolutely get back to you. And otherwise, I will see you tomorrow in survey 6.